Accessing library computer data.
The world doesn't always adhere to logic. And sometimes when you're lost, you're found.
Hey everybody, Discovery's over. We made it to the very end. Me and Clay have talked about our thoughts about the season so far. You can find all the podcasts about that in the channel or on the podcast feed. But now we're going to have kind of a special one-off episode. We've invited Kyle from Trekspertise to come over, and we're going to debate the quality of Star Trek Discovery Season 1 because, Kyle, I talked to you on Twitter, and you gave the season a B+, but that was before we saw the final episode. So we know that you haven't actually posted your final yet, so you don't have to go into if that's changed anything. But that's the reason that you're on, because you generally had a more positive outlook than a lot of people. Although I thought I'd open this up by saying hello, and then Clay's here as well. But also, Kyle, could you just explain
Hey guys.
what you think what was your sort of purpose and drive with doing the Trekspertise Discovery reviews?
I guess just to... I'm not really certain to really just kind of keep up with the themes that are happening in the show and to keep a general discussion up. I knew a lot of people were going to be talking about it, and I don't know. I thought Trekspertise might have had a particular perspective, and that might have been good for a review. Sure,
because when I watch the reviews, and I'll put a link to everyone. You're all probably obviously all familiar with it if you're listening to this channel. But I thought that your videos weren't really reviews in a sense. And I took them almost more as like companion pieces. And I started to wonder the more that if we actually disagreed on some fundamental level about the show, or if you were approaching reviewing the show more as this is in the universe of Star Trek and let me sort of guide you through what might be happening with the show. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair. It's probably more the latter, yeah.
Okay. Because I don't know if your opinion of the show has changed anything since you've done the ending episode, but me and Clay were fairly concerned, I guess, starting probably after about five or so episodes in. We started to lose the sort of bright-eyed wonder of, where could this possibly go? And it sort of started to move into more of hopefully they can just sort of land this plane that's on fire at some point and not really get into too much trouble with it. And eventually, I don't know if it really got there. And I walked away from it thinking that the show is basically a solid C- in my book. And I don't know if you could convince us otherwise. So I've talked enough. If you want to bounce back at us about some things that maybe we can start this with, what do you think Discovery has done really well that you've enjoyed going into it, and we can take it from there?
The thing that Discovery's done really well is the serialized story arc. And I know that some of us in the audience might balk at the quality of the story or certain plot points or this or that, but the fact that we could have a Star Trek series that is as close to the Deep Space Nine format as it's ever been, if not more, that part really excites me. Never mind how good the story was. That's the most innovative, and that's the most exciting part about Discovery for me.
So when you, I guess I'll just try to dig at the center of the like separation here, or the schism, where are you great when you're reviewing Star Trek? And I wonder this about fans, because I run into this with the fan feedback and everything, where it's kind of flippy floppy about what people are comparing it to. When I'm reviewing Discovery, I'm only looking at it as a modern TV show, because I have a hard time comparing it to the previous Star Treks, mostly because they've been separated from so long, and that the way that they tell their story is so different from those shows. And when people come at me with sort of odd things of, this is the best first season of Star Trek that's ever happened, I feel like they're comparing apples to oranges in a lot of ways. That's not fair to compare the show that way, because yes, to modern sensibilities, the show is better because it's more of like a modern take on something than the dated 90s or 60s take on things. But at the same time, I don't think it's a particularly good modern season of TV. And Clay, you haven't talked in a little while. I think it's been 5 minutes, so you can have. Why don't you? Can you sort of sum up your discontent with the basic storyline process and whether or not you think that the new serialized story structure was something that was a help or a hindrance?
Sure. First, Kyle, I want to say I love your videos. I think they're really great. You put a lot of work into them. They capture a. I think the difference between the way that you kind of approached it and the way we kind of approached it is, I got the sense from your videos that you were always still kind of excited to see where it was leading, whereas we were kind of like frustrated the whole time. And to kind of talk about what you were saying about the serialized format, I 100% was on board with that. I remember we've talked about previous incarnations of Star Trek where I was hoping that would happen someday. But I kind of feel like complimenting them just for that would be like complimenting a dog driving a car, where it's like, he may have crashed into a tree, but hey, he drove the car, right? I don't know. I think they kind of just got too caught up in trying to do way too much and forgot to really tell a compelling story. One of the things that I wanted to point out as one of my big problems with it, or places where I felt like it was lacking, and I actually realized this from watching your videos. Towards the end of the series, you did a piece about the supporting cast and how great they were in X, Y, and Z, and you were using all of the character names. And I was watching that going, I don't think I knew any of these characters' names. And it was just a disconnect for me where I do think there were a lot of people who really latched onto these characters, but I felt like there was extra work that had to be done to do that, or maybe not. I didn't feel the connection to these characters the way that you might have, or some of the other people who really liked the show did. And I think that for me, that was the biggest detriment. I felt like, serialized story or not, they dropped the ball in getting me, at least, to care about the characters.
I can understand that. I think overall this season suffered from imbalance, and I think part of that came off in how people connected to the characters. I saw a lot of chatter online about how people were disconnected, or they weren't connecting with certain characters or certain character reasonings, and that is a completely fair thing to say about the show. I think that the imbalance of trying to stuff so much into this first season caused them to not be able to allow character growth to happen naturally in some cases, and to not give the audience enough time with certain characters. There are a lot of the funny thing about it is that most all the characters on the show have really great premises. Take Saru, for example. Like, I think he might be my favorite at the moment. Really great setup. His relationship with Burnham is really strong, and really there's a lot of drama built into that, like this kind of brother-sister thing. And every time I saw the pair of them on screen, I was really excited, but we didn't get it that often. I think other elements, like the relationship with Mira Giorgio, crowded that out. Like, there was a lot of crowding, a lot of competition for character moments. They probably stuffed too much character work in the show. I think they probably could have slowed down a fair amount. And I think that's what you're saying is probably, I think it's more than fair. But as far as the background characters are concerned, I don't know. I was paying attention. They name dropped them several times. It's always casual. And the reason I paid attention is because when you go back to the Next Generation and Voyager, like the rotating door of background ensigns, it got really ridiculous. And on Voyager in particular, they should have been paying attention to it. In DS9, you get a little bit of paying attention to secondary characters, almost elevating them to a main status. But Discovery, from the beginning, like when they did Sinjo in the first 2 episodes, and they had the bridge crew, when they went to do the mirror version, it was the same bridge crew. Like that kind of attention to detail gets me excited, you know, as a filmmaking person. And I just noticed, and the performances those people were giving were consistent. And to have like 2 lines in an entire first season and it to be consistent across multiple episodes, it means someone's doing their homework. So I was really, despite the lack of character work that should have been on display, or the overcrowding of character work, however you want to characterize it, those background guys really stood out to me for some reason.
Yeah, do you, as someone who's more interested in like filmmaking and things like that, what would you say is like a primary focus of yours when you're watching a show like this? Are you more caught up in the visuals? Because I would say that I rarely pay attention to the visual aspect of things like that. Like I understand what you mean, and it is kind of unique that Discovery actually does have the same sort of ensigns all serving at the, like, you know, it's got the same bridge crew all the time, which doesn't make a lot of sense when you go to things like Voyager, that they kept rotating those characters in and out. But is that, I guess my focus on it would just be the fact that I'm primarily interested in the script that they're delivering, especially in a TV series. I think it matters less in film and cinema, but on the TV show side, I find myself just I felt like the fundamental problem I had with the show was basically that it was, and I don't want to get into the internet argument about whether or not this is a Star Trek show, because I think that some people came into the show, if you go to Trekspertise's first Star Trek Discovery review, you'll see all the people who just came in to say they hate the show, and they knew they were going to hate the show immediately, and then they downvoted your video and left. And if the people who watched it to the end, your last review is generally more positive because it's the people who like the show and are continuing to watch it, or are at least not aggressively against it. I thought that the show is not a Trek show, but it is Star Trek themed. In the way that if you go to like an amusement park and you go on a roller coaster and they've themed it like Pirates of the Caribbean, at its core, it's just a roller coaster ride. They've added all this stuff on top of it to make you think that it has something to do with the Pirates of the Caribbean. I feel like Discovery did that pretty much the entire series. It went out of its way to name drop things and to theme itself in a Star Trek way. Hey, we're going to the Mirror Universe. Hey, this is the starship. Hey, this is the Admiral. Hey, the Klingons are here. We've got a war going on. But at its core, I don't really know what this show is about. What would you say what was this season about of Discovery? Why was this journey necessary for us to see?
The theme of the show, there are actually a couple of themes, and I'm writing about this, or I'm editing a video about this very topic, so this is pretty topical. Is mirroring, considering what happens when you make different choices, and seeing both sides of those choices, like a dramatic contrast through mirroring has been like this central component of the entire first season, so much that it's personified in the mirror universe. Whether or not that delivered fully is a big question mark, but that's what they were talking about. And inside that theme is a whole conversation about multiculturalism, which, in regards to the imbalance comment I made earlier, is also imbalanced. They had the mirror universe, they had the Klingons, and they had both going simultaneously. The audience didn't need both to have this conversation or this theme, and they did. And so again, they're stuffing, too much in there. But I'd say that, contrast through mirroring and a kind of side conversation about multiculturalism and its strengths was kind of what the whole season was talking about. And the mirroring thing, they landed mostly. But the multicultural thing, it didn't follow through. Like, they didn't explain why it was better than whatever the Terrans or the Klingons were doing, but they definitely were talking about it, and they were definitely showing us the difference on that level between Starfleet and these two bad guys.
Well, I feel like the mirroring thing kind of fell a little flat for me, mainly because I understand when they were going to the mirror universe, they were trying to kind of posit, well, what if Starfleet was coming at it from the position of the Klingons, that kind of thing. But one of the things that Wes and I talked about throughout this is that, they never really gave you a great indication of what the core tenets of Starfleet are. We never really got to see Starfleet in action other than war. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like, and that sort of extends to all of the mirroring they did, literal and otherwise, where they presented you with this mirrored version of something, but you didn't really have anything, you didn't have the original to bounce it off of. So if you look at the Mirror Universe 4-parter there, all of the people that you're getting Mirror Universe versions of, you don't know what their opposite really is.
Red Letter Media talked about how if they were going to do the Mirror Universe, why didn't we have 4 or 5 episodes of Georgiou beforehand? You know what? Like, you kill her off too soon to then do a Mirror Universe where you're acting too much on... It ties into my theme thing. They say fans of this TV show know that this is what Star Trek is about. Therefore, they will understand the theme of mirroring that we're doing when you're just standing it up against nothing. I'm not getting any reflection of anything. You're playing off of a fan knowledge that the show is unwilling to show me about. Sorry, Clay, I interrupted you.
Oh, no. And like Mirror Lorca, for example. We don't know what regular Lorca was like, so Mirror Lorca doesn't really have any weight to it because it's just regular Lorca. We don't know if he was acting like it is Prime Lorca basically what Lorca acting on the Discovery was like. So there's that mirror image doesn't work without something to reflect. And I felt like that's where that whole concept really kind of fell flat, personally.
Right. It really did. I think you're right. And for that purpose alone, if you just consider Emperor Giorgio, I think that they misused the character in the end. I think...
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I will say, I did like in your videos how as it got closer to the end, I could tell you were really fighting just saying how some of the stuff was pretty ridiculous, especially the Georgiou turning into the captain thing. Like, even there, I could tell that you were like, this might be a bridge too far.
Yeah, that's how I don't come out and say something negative just for negative's sake.
Right.
In these videos, because I'm more interested in explaining what's going on.
Yes.
But if I stop and ask a question, that's a huge red flag.
Well, I was
why is she on the bridge? I don't get it.
I think the difference between how we reviewed the shows, and again, I consider your videos to be a companion piece. It's like if you're unfamiliar with Star Trek, watching your videos is a great way to get filled in on the blanks about what's going on. So what was funny to me in the episode the episode where they return to the Prime Universe, whatever one that is, you end your video by doing a couple minutes of discussion thinking about like what the ISS Discovery was doing in the real world, and you come up with all the, it's all the great, like, they could have been working behind the scenes, they could have been up to no good, they could have been doing a spore drive, whatever. And then the actual episode comes down, it's just like, fuck you, it blew up the minute it came back. So it's like, I felt we were doing the same thing. We were like, well, what was the ISS Discovery doing? That would be fantastic. And the show, to me, doesn't respect that level of storytelling because it's just like, nah, never mind, forget about it. It blew up. There's no reason to even think about what it was doing over here. It's not important. And I find that very disappointing. And I think that your reviews were giving the show a level of credit. And I think this just comes down to the way that we're approaching talking about it, giving the writing a level of credit that they had not earned at that point. And I can understand feeling that way early.
I think that the issue with that specifically, you can broaden this out to the entire first season. Yes, if you follow the lines they present to us each week and follow them out naturally, you get something like the ISS Discovery should have been causing havoc and should be a major impediment to the end of the series. But I think it betrays something that's happening in their writer's room where they're really, really worried about the audience. A lot of us are really keyed up on previous Trek. We're deep in lore. We know episodes inside and out. And there were tons of misdirection in this show. There are tons of zigs when they should have zagged. And it's because they're anticipating us. And I think it comes down to that. They should do that to a degree, maybe, but I think they're overdoing it. And I think the ISS Discovery issue is a huge case of overdoing it. There's no reason why that ship should have just been written off in dialogue. That should have been a real big thing. And it would have given Prime Universe Tilly a real moment, I think, to shine in the end.
Have you seen The Last Jedi?
Yes.
Clay brought up the point about tying in the when you're bringing up the zig when you should have zagged, that franchises like this are now trying to intentionally throw off their fans because they think that they want to be they want something new. Where Clay found, I'm speaking for you now, Clay, but you found Last Jedi to be unsatisfying because you realized that you wanted those tropes to be in the movie and they weren't there.
Yeah, it was more of a matter of I felt like they changed so much of it that just for the sake of doing something different, that I found myself coming out of there feeling dissatisfied because there were some things that were kind of tenets of the story that they didn't end up following through on. That was just my personal feeling about it anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Wes.
Well, I think it just ties into the I don't know if you guys know Scott Adams. He's the Dilbert cartoonist who's kind of like a wannabe political analyst now for some reason, but he does have a good analogy about in the political sphere, people are watching two different movies, which is everyone looks at the same facts, but they come away with a different opinion about things. And I feel that's kind of like some of the reviews for Discovery. Matt Zoller Seitz wrote for Vulture. He wrote the craziest review for Discovery I think that I've ever seen. He's normally a great TV critic, but he was so happy with the show. And I feel like I'm watching the show not really getting it. And a big part of that comes down to everyone who's been loving the show told me that the ending episode where they finally hash out that this is what the Federation stands for, that's what makes this a great Star Trek show. And to me, it's just another level of theme. They know that Star Trek episodes need to have someone come on and say, we are better than bad guys. That is what Star Trek is about. Like we're about doing the right thing. And the story leading up to that point had nothing to do with doing the right thing. They paid lip service to it, but it didn't actually come back in any meaningful way. And I think it just ties into the weakness of Burnham as a character on some level.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kyle.
I don't know if I'd consider Burnham a weak character. I'm not sure it ties in for me, but I definitely see your point. I think you're right about your point. Aside from Burnham,
I guess we can go into Burnham because I found Burnham to be unsatisfying because they set her up interestingly, as you say, which is a human raised by Vulcans. Mm-hmm. That then was crippling to their attempt to tell a dramatic relationship story because they're trying to play her as a Vulcan, and the show and the scripts aren't actually doing enough to explain that the reason she feels possibly conflicted is because of this Vulcan upbringing. Like, Kyle, did you find the Vulcan angle to be either, am I missing the point, or was it not fleshed out enough, or do you think that they actually hit all of that and they just wanted to sort of set the character up that way so they can flesh it out in the future, or do you feel it had something to do with the season? Burnham being an unemotional, conflicted person about what's going on, because I think the show is confused about it.
I think the show is confused about her in one aspect, and it's that they don't give her enough character growth, time to be herself. Like, we only know her through tragedy and backstory, and she's kind of reacting to twists of fate and additional tragedies. And like, you got to have that stuff for a character, yes, but you need to give her some more room to breathe a little bit. When I was really excited when she started to become involved with Tyler, because I thought, okay, she's going to confront this, and we're going to get a little exposition about her emotional state. It's clear that her emotional state is compromised, that her Vulcan upbringing is almost like a kind of child abuse in a strange way.
Yep. Sarek's bad dad continues. Yeah, part 2.
The show didn't spell that out because it didn't really spell it out for Spock. It didn't really spell it out for the Vulcans because there's a logical inference that they're expecting us to make. if you take the extra step for the writers, her character makes sense. It's almost like you had to add a piece of headcanon to it.
Yes.
Maybe they should have spelled it out some more. I wouldn't have been mad if they did. But like everyone was really upset about the mutiny and that no Starfleet character do this, or why did she do it? It didn't make any sense. But you could see plain on her face, the actress was carrying the moment, I thought. That, you know, she said she wasn't afraid, she wasn't being emotional, she was following logic, and she was, you know, tears streaming down her eyes the same moment she's saying these things. And you're like, well, that's exactly what this character is going to be. And then they kind of pulled away from the gas pedal a little bit, in addition to not, you know, explaining to the audience a little more what that means. Any other future incident where she makes a decision, there's a dramatic moment, you kind of have to infer that conflict. And the funny thing is that yes, you would have to infer those kinds of things with a normal Vulcan, you know? So I don't know. I'm pretty conflicted about it, and I would have liked to have seen a little more. I mean, a little bit more spelling out.
Yeah, I thought that they handled some of that stuff pretty well when it really called for it. Like I thought I was really into the second episode. The first episode I could kind of take or leave. In retrospect, I should have known we were in for a bumpy ride after that scene where they walk in the shape of the Star Trek insignia, the Starfleet insignia. That was that's a little questionable. But I was all in on episode 2, like from her position as doing the logical thing to the detriment of
Starfleet, basically.
Starfleet, yeah. I was all in on that. I was all in on her being a mutineer, and the Vulcan thing, I think, came out in certain places. Mm-hmm. Like, I think the final
Sarah goodbye is my example, my go-to. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's a good one. And the other good one, I actually think, as much as I didn't like the scene as a whole, her reaction to dealing with the Tyler stuff at the end of the season, I thought played into that stuff pretty well, because she does handle that very coldly. Like, she's not even going to talk to him about it. And then when she does, she's still very cold. She's got that. She's being very cold about it, but like you're saying, you can see that she's very conflicted about it. I thought she was great in that. I mean, Ash Tyler not so much, but I thought she was great. It's just, yeah, they kind of, as you're saying, they let up off the gas to the detriment of the character, I think. Because I guess it's tough, because you don't want to have the whole show be about putting her in logic quandaries. That gets old pretty fast.
Not my Star Trek, Clay. Not my Star Trek.
But yeah, I think I don't know. I kind of feel like outside of that stuff, she wasn't super well defined.
But I feel there's only the one logic quandary for her at this point. It's the fact that she screws up at the start using logic, right? And then she's in this relationship that my whole problem with the relationship is that she was not put into a fair position there where Sarah can lecture her at the very end and say goodbye and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I just feel that they didn't position that relationship properly to allow for Burnham to enter an emotional relationship with somebody and have it come back to bite her, so that she gets the downside of both the logic and the emotional outcomes. Like, that's the character growing through that story. They don't do that because there's nothing illogical about her relationship with Tyler, and we've talked about that. But it's just, I think that her Vulcanness needed to be inferred, because if you're not going to say that that's what's going on, you're playing to Star Trek fans, and that's not a satisfying story. You need to explain why this character feels this way, even if the Star Trek hardcore fans go, "I know she's a Vulcan, like, I get it." You need to explain why she feels conflicted about this. This is a new series; it's a new thing that they've got going.
And that kind of leads me back to kind of touch back on what you're saying about the details, Kyle. I feel like they focused too much on the details. Like, you could really watch this show and find all of these great details to latch onto, whether it's, keeping the same crew members on the bridge or of a lot of the consistencies and stuff. One of the things you pointed out that I actually don't even think I noticed was the exploding panel on the bridge, which is a trope that comes through on every single version of Star Trek, and I don't even think it registered with me, maybe because I expected to see it, but when you pointed it out, I was like, oh yeah, they blew up the control panel on the bridge when they took damage. That was pretty fun. But I feel like that stuff was overthought to the point where they just didn't manage to have anything to hang it on. So, and I think Ash Tyler's a big example of that, because one of the things Wes and I talked about is after they revealed the Tyler Voq thing, they spent I think across maybe 3 or possibly even 4 episodes, they kept trying to explain what they did to him. They had a character explain in more and more detail the process by which they turned Voq into Ash Tyler. And it just made it more complicated. And it was one of those things where they keep telling me this, but I don't care, because that's not the part that matters. What matters is that the character that they've created has some emotional or narrative weight to it, and he just didn't. And I thought that that was kind of representational of the show as a whole.
I really disliked Ash Tyler. No offense to that actor; he's a fun guy, but they tried to couch it as a big reveal. Most people knew from the moment you saw him on screen that there was something up with the guy. If they had not done that, it made it a little more obvious for the audience, leaning into it a little bit more, and then just instead steering into the fact that he was going to be this kind of brand new creature in the universe. He's a Klingon with a human persona. He becomes the show's kind of Data or Odo, where he's I get to explore humanity from the outside.
Right.
And then at the end, they just tossed him away. They put him on the shelf, and I'm like, you guys introduced him the wrong way, and then you're not going to do anything with him, with the part that's really cool about him. So I don't. To me, that's the weakest part of the plot, really.
And that's another thing too. The extent that they went to hide the fact that actor was playing Voq as well as Ash Tyler. Yeah. And they thought out all of these tiny little details about how to mislead people and how to throw a swerve at people, that they forgot what they were doing that in service of.
Yeah.
And he was just, you said something similar to what Wes and I were saying, which was that it would have been so much more satisfying if the audience had known very early that he was also Voq. And that would have taken a lot of weight off of them, as
and
far
keep the
as
characters in the dark. You mean, but let the audience know what's
going
on.
Yeah, and then the audience would be paying attention to his emotional development only, because that's all you'd have.
Right.
Yeah, I think that, and I think, Clay, we had talked about, I would have been even happy. I wouldn't have wanted to disguise it anymore. I would have just been happy with them revealing to the characters as well earlier what was going on, because I thought he was somewhat satisfying in the last episode, where he was a little bit too zen. He's like, yes, I'm also a Klingon now, so let me go over and talk to these Klingons, and they'll tell me what's going on with their dice playing game. But I think that I think that they really that storyline. Kyle, can you just give me your breakdown of what happened to Ash Tyler and Voq? Can you describe? Was there really an Ash Tyler?
Yes, there was really an Ash Tyler. He died in the Battle of the Binary Stars. The body that new Ash, we'll call him, is currently living in is Voq's body that's been heavily surgically altered to look like the old Ash Tyler.
Okay.
So it's a Klingon body with the highest degree of plastic surgery.
It's so complicated.
And then finger lasers, they finger lasered his personality onto Voq's.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Why?
I don't know, man.
And why would they? What was the point? What was the point of hiding Voq underneath Ash Tyler's personality? Just to get him to be a better sleeper agent, except he doesn't know that he's a sleeper agent, so when it's revealed, he just has a mental breakdown instead of actually doing anything about it?
Well, I think something went wrong with the activation part of it. I think she was supposed to give him a command word or something, and then boom, he switches and he's Voq, and the Ash Tyler persona goes away. And I think something went wrong. Generally speaking, I think it was too complicated of an ask for the audience.
Yeah.
And a dodge of something that already exists. We already have a whole population of augment Klingons. They could have given Voq like the augment virus, flattened out those ridges and little cosmetic surgery, and sent him on his way.
Yeah.
But I guess they needed the Ash Tyler persona to get on board the ship, because it is stated in dialogue in the very first episode that Starfleet hadn't had contact with the Klingons for like a century.
Yeah.
So they probably don't know anything about them. So I guess the Klingons would also... It would be obvious if you stuck a Klingon's agent on the ship. Like, what does this door do, you know?
Right, yes.
You know, and you know, looking back on it, it brings up a question for me, which is what was his mission? Like after they turned him into Tyler, what was his
It's to fit
goal?
the theme of losing your identity, Clay. They need a character who has just basically lost his identity, and they're gonna I don't know.
Again, like I said throughout our episodes, Wes, it sounds great on a note card.
Yes.
But once you have to flesh it out, it's like what is it in service of? And it's this show works really well it works really well in the worst style of modern television.
Yeah.
Where they keep throwing twists at you. And if you're just kind of along for the ride, if you're just there for the roller coaster, then, you know, every time that the car dips, you know, you're going to throw your hands up in the air. But I don't really know what the other side of that analogy is, but you know what I mean. It's a if you're in it for more of the story and the satisfying narrative, I think they just focused on the wrong stuff. And for some people, I guess that was satisfying.
Have you guys seen Ozark, the Netflix show?
No, I heard it's very good though.
I haven't, no.
I was watching or listening to a podcast called The Watch, where they watch TV critics that watch a lot more TV than I do, and they brought up the fact that they weren't really enamored with the Ozark. Mostly, their criticism mostly was that it had like 3 seasons of plot in about 5 episodes to start the show off, and they were wondering, not talking about Discovery, if this was a new television pacing thing. That this is what...
Yeah.
Based on analytics of what people watch, this is the model that gets people to watch things over and like to watch things through all the way. If it is, I think they're confused about what the Netflix model is compared to the broadcast TV model. But I think that that's my problem with Discovery is that, and Cal, I can throw this back to you. We actually I really liked the Klingon stuff at the start. I thought killing T'Kuvma was a huge mistake, right from the beginning. That was just an awful thing to do because he was the only Klingon that had any sort of personality. That was like, oh, what's the deal with this guy? He seems kind of interesting. I would have focused on the Klingon War. I would have avoided the mirror universe completely, and I would have stuck with the Klingon War because that to me felt at least like it had something interesting to say. You said that you felt it was a multicultural conversation. I thought that they had positioned the Klingons really well to comment on that in a way that made a lot of sense, and then have the Tyler Ash Voq reveal be a way for both sides to see each other's positions. And that would lead into the TOS thing, where they're basically at a Cold War with each other. That didn't happen. What did you think of the Klingons?
I thought it was a good start. I was really excited about him. But folks had a lot of trouble with all the spoken Klingon. I didn't. I thought it was great. It was, you know, of all the things Discovery is, that was some of the best spoken Klingon I'd heard in the entire franchise. Like, it had a real cadence to it, real lived-in feel to it, and T'Kuvma was really cool, I thought. I comparing it to the Mirror Universe, I think it really should have been one or the other. And they started out with the Klingons. They should have stuck with the Klingons. And I don't know why they didn't. But actually, I have a theory as to why they didn't.
Ooh,
I think
theories.
I think it's a behind-the-scenes production thing. So Brian Fuller was originally the showrunner here. And they originally had a 13-episode spread and an original story with a lot of Alice in Wonderland themes and identity themes and then the whole Klingon comment on modern politics stuff. But then he left before the show finished its production. And the new writing team had to pick up the pieces. I don't know if you noticed, but they added 2 extra episodes to the 13-episode run in the middle.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think it was originally supposed to be 13 episodes. We're going to get probably a cliffhanger of some kind. The Klingon War probably wasn't going to be over. And I think the reason that the season comes off so imbalanced is because the writing people and the showrunners now are trying to tie up all the stuff that Fuller started. And then the second season will probably be a lot steadier. They would have learned from the process. But I think it's Fuller's departure that's causing a lot of our narrative woes, I suspect.
We had a similar theory, I think, Wes, right? That it seemed like it almost felt like they were rushing through all of the stuff Fuller had put on the table just so they could get through it and kind of do their own thing, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Fuller's original idea was, I don't know if this started with the whole production, was the anthology idea here, where you could actually tell, it would be possible to put a very open-ended mirror universe season in an anthology. Yeah. You could do that. It's tough to do it in a series that's going to continue for a little while. But I think we'd be shocked, Kyle, if season 2 was not a massive improvement over season 1. I think season 1 suffered from horrible behind-the-scenes production stuff that was going on. My real issue doesn't have to deal with the show. It's the marketing aspect that they're giving us, where they're trying to feed me this bullshit and claim that they've spun gold out of it. And I don't really appreciate that. Like, I understand they're marketing it, but and it ties into the whole, the sort of angle of, look at how progressive we are about these things. Look at our gay characters. Oh, we killed them, and then we didn't even involve the last one in the last episode. Like, Stamets is just missing in the last episode for some reason. And
there was oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just feel it's unsatisfying. Like, I want these characters to be in the show, but don't act like you've done something spectacular here when you've really just sort of brought in these characters to die Culber dies a meaningless death here. It seems to only happen so that we can have a Stamets hallucination where he gets Culber to reveal what the actual Spore Network is about, and then it goes from there. I found that very unsatisfying.
Yeah, me too.
And there's one we talked about it a little bit, Wes, on our show. There was a moment where I actually kind of stopped and went, oh, that's actually really cool. And I can't remember which. I think it was maybe the second or third to last episode, where they had a shot of the bridge and all of the stuff was going on in the bridge, and I realized that there was no straight white male cast member involved in the show at this point, and the bridge was just as diverse as possible, and it felt really satisfying. And it was it was a little strange to me how they managed to do that so seamlessly and not bring attention to it, but then in other cases when they were like really trying to talk up the things that they were doing that were new, it just fell so flat.
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to tell us that professional wrestling is still real.
Yes.
Huh?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Spoiler alert. Yeah, that was one of the strengths of the show, is that the diversity in the casting, and it was a subtle creep, and you didn't realize it that when you turned around to pay attention to it. Like in the final scene in the caves when Laurel shows up, you have Laurel, Michelle Yeoh, and Sonequa Martin Green. And it's like the finale happens between like three ladies, and it naturally got to that point, and nothing got shoehorned in.
Well, maybe not diversity-wise, but story-wise,
not diversity-wise. No,
different conversation.
They did have to keep Laurel hanging around for 8 episodes in the brig to have that conversation. Yeah.
Oh man, poor Laurel.
Yeah, I think it's the show will improve in the second season. This isn't going up, Kyle, until after your final review goes up, so we can talk about things now without the worry of spoiling your final review. Let's talk about the Enterprise and the end of season 1.
Didn't like it.
All right, so explain. I can remember, Clay, if you liked it, but Kyle, go first and explain what you thought about the Enterprise.
Okay, so here is a primary concern I have with the first season. They are not using canon in a way that lets you know that this ship and its situation also inhabits the universe that Captain Kirk inhabits, that Captain Sisko inhabits, that Bajor lives in. They're relying on canon as a form of legitimacy. They're trying to show the audience, hey, look, we're still Star Trek. We're still doing things in this universe. When the Enterprise showed up in the very end, I just rolled my eyes. Like it killed all the originality and all of the things that Discovery had built on its own through its own merit. All the good things you can say about the show, and I have no interest in seeing that crew or this ship being referenced in this show. One of the really cool strengths I found about all the other series floating around is that they're not talking about each other that much, you know? It only comes up occasionally, and it gives you a sense of a really big universe. And
TNG almost failed when it would try to bring back like the Spock unification episode is just such an abomination of an episode. It's like they didn't even make a big deal. They took it to the opposite extreme where it was such a little deal. They're like, put Spock in this terrible episode. That'll be fine. And it feels like a disservice to the character. And Discovery is the opposite, where, you know, we're going to flash NCC blank, blank, blank on the screen, and the audience just shits themselves. And then the Enterprise soars in, and we all go, look at that thing. But I agree with you about the servicing of fandom, I guess, in that sense, and not really leaving the series to be on its own. But go ahead.
Kyle.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Kyle, are you a Doctor Who fan at all?
Oh, yeah. My wife more than me, but yeah, I've watched a lot of Doctor Who, and I'm actually looking forward to Jodie Whittaker's take.
Oh, me too. I'm really looking forward to it. But the analogy I would use for the Enterprise for me is, and actually, you know, kind of jumping off what we were just talking about referencing the show. When they brought Doctor Who back about 10 years ago, they kind of went out of their way not to mention the previous incarnation and kind of start it up as its own thing. And so when you did get bits and pieces along the way, whether it was, you know, different villains or just little pieces, it was that much more satisfying because they spent the time to build their own brand basically before they start, you know, relying on some of the old stuff. So by the time they got to their 50th anniversary show, I was like on pins and needles that entire episode because they were, you know, bringing back old doctors and all this. Like they were using the history of the show as a way to amplify the stories that they had been telling since then. And the other series of Star Trek, I feel like, did that as well. Like we were saying, Wes, most of them, you know, Dr. McCoy in the first episode of TNG aside, most of them establish their own show before they start, you know, going back in time and ending up on the Enterprise or something like that, like in Deep Space Nine. And so that you have an understanding of this new world and these new characters that you can play off against the traditional older stuff. Whereas this one, you know, exactly, they haven't built their own identity yet. So when they were doing this thing at the end where, you know, it was like, distress call coming in, and they're like giving you little bits and pieces of the number. I was just dreading it because I was not looking forward to it at all. And then they show you the ship, and I'll be honest, I liked the ship. I thought the ship looked good.
It looked really great.
Yeah, but aside from that, I just like my heart kind of sunk a little bit because I was like, oh, it felt like such a. It felt kind of like they were trying to apologize for what they had done before this. Like ending the first season of this show, which has been tenuous at best, with here's the Enterprise and the original theme. That'll do it, right? That'll get you guys psyched up enough to come back. And that's how it felt to me. And I was saying to Wes, I don't know about you, but I don't think we're gonna see the inside of that ship. I think when the second season starts, they're gonna get like a over the radio or over the, you know, a visual less communication from Enterprise telling. Well,
it would just be a hologram, right? Because they have hologram technology, so it would be.
I wouldn't even bank on hologram.
Okay.
I have a feeling that they won't give you anything from the inside of that ship, and it'll just be like, hey, here's the ship, and they're going to give you like a mission, and then they're going to go, and that's going to be it. Because I don't think I don't know about you guys, but I don't think they're going to do like a multi-episode arc involving the Enterprise.
No, I don't think they're going to talk about it again. I think we'll just pick up like 6. I think we'll just pick up like 6 months down the road and be like, "Oh, it's a thing that happened." You know,
I'd be so unsad. I'm stuck in a rock and a hard place here. I don't want to see the Enterprise, but if they're just like, "Hey, Enterprise," and they're like, "Go to this planet and save these people," I would be so I'd be so annoyed that they showed us the Enterprise in the first
Yeah.
place at that point. It'd be like, what was the point of this? Just to get people to tease us into... It's certainly no 360 camera spin around Riker who says, Mr. Worf, fire. Like, this is not exactly a great cliffhanger you've hung us on here.
You know how Peter Pan needs a happy thought to fly in Hook or in any other version of Peter Pan? I think my happy thought is that 360 camera move around Riker when he says fire. It's just like every time I get chills.
That's funny.
Kyle, I wanted to ask you, how did you feel about the lack of log entry for the most part? Because we felt like we didn't realize how important it was until it came back in the show. Because they only did it like maybe 2 or 3 times. And every time they did it, I thought it really went a long way to establishing what was going on and giving us a little bit more insight to the plot. Especially since our running gag on our show was that throughout this episode, throughout the series, you have no idea where the ship is at any given time. It just sort of is in space somewhere. So how did you feel about the lack of log, whether it's Captain or anybody else?
I felt great about it.
Yeah.
I'm not a traditionalist when it comes to cinema. I like cracking the eggs open and seeing what'll come out. One of the things I liked about Discovery that I didn't think they went far enough on was breaking the format of the old stuff. And it's not that I dislike the old stuff. It's just I've already seen all of it. But whenever those log entries popped up, it was surreal and familiar and pleasant, and I did like it. It did remind me of older Trek. But I liked that they didn't do it every single episode. I thought that was a braver touch.
It's interesting. It might be a difference between how we all would if we were in charge of remaking the series, because I felt going into it, what I wanted from Discovery was a modern spin on the Trek tropes. And this is just off the top of my head, if you built an episode that was around listening to logs and stuff, if there was a way to,
Be pretty good, actually.
Well, yeah, if there's a TNG episode that's super unsatisfying where Geordi tries to solve a mystery and you're like, oh, he's going to listen to all the logs and do it. He never does it. But if they did something where they played with those tropes and they brought them into a new system, because I feel that those don't make Star Trek the show that it is, but it guides the storytelling in a way that causes those episodes to be Star Trek.
You know what would have been kind of fun, and I don't know if this is something they could do in the future or is worth doing. They might have shot their shot with George Al, but it would have been kind of interesting if a running thing had been, instead of Captain's logs for the ship as it was happening, Burnham had a record of George Al's Captain's logs from the Shenzhou.
Yeah.
That she kind of looked to as like a mentor kind of teaching thing that she used. So basically she'd listen to a George Al log from the Shenzhou that was somehow, thematically connected to whatever they were dealing with in the episode. That would have been kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's how you could theme each episode in the season. Her learning. I mean, it's odd. I feel like there's so much for it.
Too. No, I don't like. I have a tendency to go off and rewrite the show, but if that kind of thing would then make the Emperor Georgiou that much more satisfying, because even though she's not on the show, you'd have this sense of who she was as a captain and who she was as a person, and then when you're presented with the evil version, it is such a stark contrast.
She can say the same phrase with a totally different meaning.
Yeah, exactly.
You can really mirror those characters at that point. Yeah, it would be tough. I think that so I guess we can close it out with just sort of a discussion about just generally how you think Discovery handled the Star Trek transition. So Kyle, it sounds like you'd rather push it further away from the Trek that we know, which is, which I can understand. You sound like you'd want it to be more of this serialized nature, which I'm fine with. My comments has always been, I wish it was Mad Men's serialization, where there was a story in the background, but each episode stands on its own and isn't directly feeding Breaking Bad style into the next thing. Mm-hmm. That would have been my way to go about it. But just what are you hoping for in season 2? What do you expect? What do you just kind of hope would happen? And, how would the show fix a few of the minor issues in your eyes?
I'd hope they slow down a little bit. There's a lot of breakneck stuff happening. I'd hope they'd zag when it feels like they're going to zag and not zig every time, zig some of the time. And I want them to stay away from canon a little bit. I know they have to pay attention to some stuff, but I thought they were leaning too hard on it. And if they do those three things, I think season 2 will be light years ahead of season 1.
Do you wish that they had placed it in the future instead of in the past?
100%.
Yeah.
I don't want to go back. And when there was a chance, when they were doing the mycelial network thing to escape the Imperial ship, and it looked like they're going to time travel, my money was on them going, post DS9. And I was like, come on, man, just do it. You guys have been going breakneck and all this kind of stuff. Just do this one thing, and everything is going to come out great. And
totally break away from Fuller's idea. Like get as far away from Fuller as possible.
I mean, this is a science fiction show where literally nothing, is coherent, and you can do anything you want. It's almost Doctor Who, and they don't do that. And I was really upset about that.
Yeah,
I
was just gonna say it covers all of the complaints people have made about technology and all this kind of stuff, and rewriting canon as far as that stuff goes doesn't matter anymore. And personally, I think that last shot of the season would have worked way better is if they had been, well into the future, and then we get a future version of the Enterprise, because who knows what the hell's going on with that? That at least gives you some sort of a cliffhanger.
Or if it had just been the Enterprise E, or the Titan with Captain Riker, just voice
Titan,
only.
The Titan would make sense. Yeah,
that's how you make fans happy, and we didn't get that. And
I'll still think a big missed opportunity was to have it set in the future and then have Brent Spiner be the voice of the computer.
I can see that actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's just my short statement would be, we saw the original Enterprise at the end of the season. I wonder who CBS thinks is watching our original TOS fans, the people watching Discovery. Like, wouldn't it have been better to see a different show, as you guys were saying, like the younger fan base or whatever? But I don't know. It'll be interesting. I think that for me, season 2, if they need to slow down, I want more of an episode by episode focus. I hope they don't get into a rotating captain's chair situation. Like, I hope that gets settled somewhat easily.
They've never done, I mean, maybe they've done it for an episode or two, but have they ever done a Star Trek? Well, I guess there's only a limited number of Star Trek series, so obviously the answer is no. But I was going to say, have they ever done a Star Trek incarnation where they just didn't have a captain for whatever reason? Because that would be kind of interesting too, as if they kept teasing a rotating captain, but it just ended up being Saru, because they just don't ever get the captain.
No, they've always had a captain. That's another interesting thing about this show, is that the captain isn't the lead character. Although Jason Isaacs did a really great job.
I feel it actually, my criticism of that, Cal, is that having Burnham not be in command destroys her agency as a character, because she's not allowed to drive the action. She's just forced to be a witness to things that are going on. And the captains in previous series are the ones who have enough agency to make their own choices about the way that they're going. And Lorca, being the evil captain here, drove the car off the cliff, basically. And that was his intent, and that's what he did as a character. But I felt it just rendered Burnham sort of being stuck in this position where she can't fight back against the powers that be, and she's in a situation where there's a big war going on, and admirals are telling her what to do, and captains are telling her what to do, and she's just fighting to survive in that storyline.
I kind of found that to be refreshing, personally. We'll have to see that in a different way, but I thought that dramatically it was more interesting to have more limitations on the character and to see how they'd figure things out. And I didn't think it was that limiting to her. She was still pretty gung-ho. She convinced her captain to let her do stuff like save Sarek, and that's what a main character would have done anyway. And
yeah.
But I thought the more limitations were good. Like, you remember the original, not the original, but the Next Generation episode of Lower Decks?
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I thought that was such a refreshing vantage point. And this show has a little bit of that I appreciate.
Yeah, I actually don't think they went far enough with it, to be honest with you. Because when they started it out and they had her as the mutineer, I was just really excited about the possibilities of that, especially when you had Lorca as a captain who clearly was going to be skirting the rules and pushing the boundaries about what he might do to get the job done. You know, if he has Burnham on the ship with him who he thinks is on the same wavelength as him, he might be asking her to do things she's not comfortable with, mission-wise and stuff like that. I was really excited because then she has a real crisis in front of her over, you know, what is the right thing to do? Is it logic? Is it feeling? Is it chain of command? Who is she answering to? And I think that they gave her back too much agency, or I should not agency, but too much. They basically took the pariah part away from her way too quickly, I think. But with her, I guess, again, note cards on a board, I guess making her an officer again by the end of the season makes sense. But I didn't find it satisfying because they just swept her mutineer. Is there a mutineer ship? Is that a word? I don't know.
Mutineerancy, yes.
Yeah, they swept her mutiny. I guess there we go. Swept her mutiny under the rug so quickly just to basically put her back on the Discovery doing stuff she'd be doing if she was just literally anybody on the ship. Yeah. It kind of took away from the specialness of the character that they set up.
Yeah.
I would have had her not be a commander. I would have put her in a lieutenant grade situation. It's like you get to be at the bottom of the command structure, and you have to start over, and then make Saru the captain. Yeah. And then let season 2 and 3 be the two of them working their issues out, because they've got a lot of issues we didn't get to address.
Right,
yes.
right.
Yep.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that scene where he straight up tells her that he's jealous of her. That was good.
Yeah. That was like one of the best highlights of the show to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Saru's great as the catchphrase of the show.
Guys, Saru is great.
We do like Saru. Saru is the Star Trek character, I think, of the show. But we talked for over an hour, so I think it's time to wrap it up. But guys, check out Trekspertise. It's a YouTube channel. I'll put the links to it. You guys obviously know if you're listening to this. And then I'll put up a link to this Star Trek Discovery Vulture article because I want people to read that. Let us know your thoughts. Kyle, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a great pleasure talking about debating the quality of Star Trek Discovery. And I'm looking forward to season 2. I need a little bit of a break. I'm glad it's not coming out in 6 months, but we'll see where we stand when it comes out in 2019.
Agreed.
Clay, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I got a bone to pick with you, man, because you told me we were going to be talking about Miami Vice, and you tricked me into talking about Discovery more.
Miami Vice.
Well, I listened to. We'll have to talk about the movie, Jamie Foxx and who's the other guy?
Colin Farrell.
Colin Farrell. We'll have to talk about. I have not seen that.
You owe me an entire season of Highlander podcasts after this.
Guys, check out Trekspertise, check out the Highlander podcast, check out Miami Vice, the movie that we'll be talking about. Check out Real Ripe and Real Rotten. We talked about Steven Spielberg's Hook, which was fresh on Clay's tongue. We are going to be talking about E.T. shortly, and then we're continuing talking about Deep Space Nine, so check out all those podcasts. Guys, thank you very much for listening. See you later.